What historical fact did you learn in school that later turned out to be completely wrong or misrepresented? Early 90s in Sweden I learned about Ättestupa, the Viking practice of seniors throwing themselves being thrown down cliffs when they could no longer sustain themselves contribute to the commune. They did not. I watched a documentary about this called Midsummer. How exactly what came to my mind. Movie is wild. In 7th grade my geography teacher taught us that China had such a big population because of the Asian monsoons, which basically means the rain season. Didn't get it? As my teacher explained, China had a big population because due to the rain couples would stay inside more, get bored and fuck to pass the time, leading to more children being born. She even asked this in a test. That's kinda awesome. Why does China have such a large population? They stayed inside and fucked a lot while it was raining. My grandfather has this story of a business trip he once took to Finland years ago. When he arrived, he asked his Finnish counterpart what they do for fun in Finland. The Finn said, "In the summer, we go fishing and we make love." My grandfather was slightly taken aback by this response, but he then asks about what they do in the winter. The Finn replies, "We do not fish." Battle of Wounded Knee. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Also, my class only really mentioned the number of American soldiers wounded, not the 250+ Lakota people that were killed. My father gifted me Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee when I was 15. Why? It was a shocking revelation. I read that book around that age. Really opened my eyes to a lot of shit going on. Props to your dad for helping your education like that. Similarly, the Irish potato famine. It wasn't a famine, it was the British starving the Irish. I had a teacher in the 90s laugh at me when I said I didn't think currencies needed to be tied to gold. He didn't know the gold standard ended decades ago. What are countries just gonna say it's worth something? Now it's tied to aircraft carriers. I thought it was tied to JPEGs of monkeys and sunglasses. Teachers being confidently incorrect is the worst. I had a high school teacher who docked my essay because nobody ever calls WW1 the Great War. Fuck you, Tricenor. Turns out the American Civil War was not a result of Abraham Lincoln being a poopy head. Gotta thank the Mississippi school system for that one. Yep. Being raised in the South, I grew up hearing about the War of Northern Aggression. We learned about the War of Northern Aggression in my rural South Dakota school. Shout out to my teacher. It was in the context of get a load of what those ding-dongs tried to brand this thing down south. That Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. He certainly didn't, but he developed the first version that was commercially practical on a mass scale, which is still pretty damn important. The discovery of America. Columbus was far from the wide-eyed visionary explorer children's books make him out to be. Very, very far. You know it's bad when he was even imprisoned for a while when he first returned to Spain once Ferdinand and Isabella found out how badly he treated the indigenous peoples. IRC. This was largely an excuse for the Spanish crown to not pay him as much as they were meant to. I'm a teacher, so I like to check myself when I say something that they're surprised by. Recently I found out that black widow spiders only eat their mates in captivity, and it's actually not common. Same for praying mantis. While I can't comment on black widows, I have personally seen a praying mantis eat the head of the male out in the wild. So while anecdotal, I can't see it being that rare. Also, the headless male flew around. I tried to pick it up and it grabbed my finger, drawing blood, and attempted to bite me. Except it had no head, so that was wild. Still hurt though. In the Philippines, that Filipinos invented the fluorescent bulb and karaoke. Korean American here. No joke, my dad, less than 3 months ago, insisted that Koreans invented the Christmas tree. I told my son, who was studying about a country's history, and the teacher sent a homework about one of their castles saying it was from the 9th century, and that it had remained like that always. And it was on the history book too. I learned that also when I was a kid, some years after I went there from Norway. I talked with my son, went to the digital archive of the municipality, and downloaded tons of photos that showed the castle's walls were indeed ancient, but that the castle as is was built in 1946 according to what the dictatorship of the time decided a medieval castle should look like. He was baffled and was totally unaware of that. My kid was put aside by that teacher who, despite me showing him the photos, privately took it as an offense. That kinda reminds me of when this English celebrity, Jeremy Irons, bought a castle in Ireland and painted it pink. People were mad about it, but it was actually what castles would have been painted like during that time. Lot of Columbus hate in here, and for good reason. But I'd just like to add that the impression I got in school was that the Native Americans were all these incredibly peaceful, pipe-smoking hippies who shared the land and just wanted to beat their drums and grow corn. It turns out, they were unbelievably violent to one another and often stole each other's land. But that doesn't make what Columbus did right. Nope, it sure doesn't. Let's be fair. Everyone around the world were violent to one another and often stole each other's land. The only difference was the technology level. That the Pilgrims came over to America for religious freedom, painted them as these kind of progressive liberal Christians, and across the pond was too stifling and controlling. No, not the full story. Pilgrims came over here because they wanted to be religious wackadoos. I mean, they wanted freedom to be wackadoos, religiously. That if you did something blatantly illegal, the cops would arrest you. Add on, if you obey the law, you have nothing to fear. Tulsa? Nothing happened in Tulsa, check your history book. I thought that was made up for the Watchmen series on HBO. If it was a real event, surely I would have heard about something that crazy in my 40+ years. Nope. Turns out it was an entirely real event. I only know about the Tulsa Massacre from Watchmen. I only know about the partition of India from Ms. Marvel. Streaming services are doing a better job of teaching me world history than all my schooling. That the $ is AU superimposed on an S, that stands for the United States. The symbol predates the US. 5th grade, 1990. Teacher tells the class, all of the Central American countries are Spanish-speaking. My aunt had just returned from Belize and I rose my hand and said, Belize is officially English-speaking. Teacher says, no, they are all Spanish. That nobody walks around with a calculator in their pocket. Who else here was raised in the 80s where the food pyramid was drilled into your head? I've known longer that it's hogwash than I lived with it, but I still can't get it out of my head, and my subconscious will always think that's the appropriate way of meal planning. Peaceful negotiation only happens after a long period of violence and unrest until the colonialists find themselves on the losing end. Ain't nobody going to give up a piece of land after being asked nicely. School history books tends to make the war and the peace negotiation as two separate unrelated events. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Paul Revere rode approximately 20 miles from Boston to Lincoln, Massachusetts on April 18, 1775 to warn of approaching British troops before being intercepted by a British Army patrol. It was actually Israel Bissell who continued the journey from Watertown, Massachusetts to Philadelphia, 345 miles, on the morning of April 19 to alert the Continental Congress. His message resulted in more than 50,000 armed troops being mobilized to Boston to meet the British invasion. Eating carrots helps your night vision. That's British WW2 propaganda. They did that to hide radar from the Germans. Make it seem like British pilots just had really great eyesight, which is why they were so successful at night raids. Yet it works so well as propaganda because it has a kernel of truth. Carrots really do help your night vision if you have vitamin A deficiency, not that unlikely with wartime rationing. It's just that night vision is not why the British suddenly had an edge over the Germans. Oh, definitely the story about young George Washington and the cherry tree. You know, the one where he supposedly chopped down his dad's cherry tree and then confessed, saying, I can't tell a lie. That tale was in all of our elementary school textbooks, and teachers used it to hammer home the importance of honesty and integrity. But as I got older, I found out that the whole thing was basically a made-up legend. It turns out the story was created by a biographer named Mason Locke Weems, who wanted to paint Washington as this perfect moral figure. I mean, it worked. Kids like me totally bought into it. At the time, we didn't question whether it was true or not. It was just one of those facts we were taught, no questions asked. Looking back now, it feels kind of ridiculous. But hey, I guess the point of the story wasn't really about accuracy. It was about teaching a moral lesson. Still, it's weird to think about how much of what we learned as history was actually just storytelling. Taste buds. I vividly remember a textbook saying that since we had the soft spot at the tip of the tongue, we liked licking ice creams, and 7-year-old me obviously believed this piece of collective knowledge because obviously a book had to be right. Canadian. We were taught that the indigenous peoples taught colonizers to grow corn and shook hands over treaties they essentially bargained for. Blood being blue until exposed to oxygen. First thing that came to mind is that America was a nation of exceptionalism where all minorities and ethnicities could immigrate, start over, and build a wonderful life. Yeah, they really only meant white immigrants. From Europe. That where the Bible said Adam donated a rib to make Eve, it said it as a theological way of explaining why men have fewer ribs than women. Watson and Crick discovered DNA. Rosalind Franklin did the bulk of the work. They were involved and published the findings, though, so they got all the credit. Actually, they gave her credit, but she didn't get the Nobel Prize because she was dead. What historical fact did you learn in school that was later debunked? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.